Welcome to our latest Apex Systems ERP Essentials webinar series. Today, we are going to be covering optimizing supplier relationships, a deep dive into in-force contract management, strategic sourcing, and the supplier portal. I am Ann Wehrheim. I'm the Apex Practice Director over the Functional, Technical, and Managed Service consultants here at Apex Systems. I started my journey with Infor as a client, as most of you that are with us today are also clients. I have a passion for supply chain, so I am like I said, past client for supply chain, as well as I'm a supply chain architect, and like I said, now the practice director as well. Okay, just a little bit about Apex Systems. We're a leading global technology service business that incorporates industry insights and experience to deliver solutions that fulfill our clients' digital visions. Our Infor experts not only ensure seamless implementations, but also provide ongoing optimizations to enhance your business operations. Apex has a global presence in over 70 locations across the US, Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Europe, and India. So our agenda for today, we're going to cover contract management. We're going to learn how to streamline contract creation, ensure compliance, automate workflows for efficient contract management. We're going to look into strategic sourcing, discover the key elements of strategic sourcing, including the spend analysis, supplier evaluation, contract negotiation, all to drive cost savings and enhance supplier relationships. Through all of these, we're going to be talking about how that supplier is relating to all of these topics. We're going to understand the benefits of a supplier portal, such as real-time communication, purchase order management, invoice submission, and really how we can collaborate with our suppliers and reduce those administrative tasks. And then we're going to end with some case studies, discussion on why we need to pay attention to our supplier relationships. All right, so we're going to start this in contract management. Contracts stored in a single repository. We can use Infor Document Management or IDM as a place where we can store attached related documents, maybe signed agreements, any other artifacts that go along with contracts can either be stored attached to the contract itself in contract management, or they can be stored in IDM. We can create contracts from templates during negotiations. We can select those predefined articles and terms, apply flexible pricing. We can support items and vendor items. We can record and track rebates, use retainage and withhold a portion for payment. So contract management really is I think the one part of this software, the Infor Cloud Suite software, where it is highly configurable for whatever needs there are for companies or clients. It can be used as just a way to do cost defaulting, or we can use it in a much more elevated way and do internal approval. We can do external approval or negotiations using articles, terms, and conditions, and we can create outputs from that. We can create contract document outputs themselves. We can track rebates across a single contract or across an entire supplier with multiple contracts involved. So there's a lot of features and benefits with contract management, and our supplier, obviously, our suppliers are crucial and very integral and integrated in all of this. So when we talk about contract creation, this is a process intelligence, looks like a Visio flow, and that's basically what it is. So there are multiple ways that we can create contracts. We can do high touch creations as just manually entering those individual contracts. We can do contract imports. We can use our GPO as a way to provide us information on new contracts that we are available to us, or updating contracts. So there's a lot of ways that we can improve that information, and ultimately work with our suppliers better, and get our pricing correct, starting on the right days and ending on the right days and things like that when we have changes. So the contract creation, we can use our strategic sourcing, and the contract creation could be a result of an event from sourcing. The other also holds true, that we could use a contract, and that can be a starting point for a sourcing or a bid event that needs to go out for a renewal of that contract, or just open it up for multiple suppliers to be able to participate in that. Like I said, kind of high touch would be the manual entry. Wizard is still a high touch way of creating contracts. Some easier things to do. If you've got a contract that's expired or is expiring, you can just copy a contract. It's very easy. You can just choose when you're doing that what to include and not include as part of the new contract that you're creating from the old contract. We have contract templates, a great way to default certain things, but it's limited. So that's also a possibility, but maybe it's definitely less touch than the manual entry or the wizard, but it's still a touch. And interviews also a way. Honestly, I don't have a ton of people that use that process for creating contracts, but we can use something called propose a new contract. We can have our suppliers, if we're using the supplier portal, we can have them propose a new contract. We can have requesters actually propose a new contract. So something like that, you could use this propose a new contract and include with it internal approvals. So if you wanted to allow your requesters or your managers to be able to propose a new contract, they can do that, and we can have an approval process built in with that. The other thing, like I said, propose a new contract could actually come from a vendor through using Supplier Portal. And you don't have to use both of them. You could do one and not the other if you decided to go in that direction. But the person that's proposing that contract has done a lot of the legwork. So again, it's a little, you've still got to touch it because we're going to review it and things like that, but it's a little less touch than everything that's come before that in the list. So like I said, the supplier could also propose that contract as well. The GPO, it can be very beneficial if you're using Health Trust, Vizient, or GHX. And these are still touch. We still need an adult in the room. Somebody needs to be able to say that just because Health Trust, Vizient, GHX, there's a new contract available to your business or your company, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to want to bring it in and adjust that and have that as a part of your contract repository and ultimately for cost vaulting if people are ordering specials or item master items. So there's still some, but as we've gone down the list, it's definitely less touch than manually entering contracts. And then there's contract import. That's always an option. There is a little bit of setup when it comes to contract import, but once you do it once, that is kind of there for you to use over and over again, year after year. But again, there's still some touch involved with that. So nothing is completely automated, and there is obviously still some review that we're going to do. So this is just a representation of the life cycle for procurement contracts. We're creating a contract either from a sourcing event or one of the ways that we just reviewed. We're creating that header, the contract itself, and then we're going to upload contract lines, items. It could be service, obviously, it could be goods. Whatever we're doing, we're adding those details to our contract. And then we're going to, if it's something that we are going to be negotiating, we're finalizing those terms, those articles, terms and conditions with our supplier or our potential supplier. And then ultimately it gets approved and activated. Then we're doing transactions. We're creating purchase orders and things like that against the contracts. If it's a service contract, we are services, are being done, and we're applying those invoices directly to that service contract. And then we're monitoring it. So we've got, reports that we can look at. We've got, sales data that we can look at. And then there's the life cycle, into a contract. Is it going to be updated, or does it need to be updated? Does it need to be renewed? And how are we going to do that? Are we starting a new contract? Are we putting it out for a sourcing event? Or are we just going to update the effective and expiration date and maybe some of the lines on the contract and just keep moving? Obviously, our audit logs for all of this will give us an accurate representation of how old the contract is, what the changes and stuff were made to it. So, just being able to keep an eye on our contracts and how we're doing, and as well as how we can interact with our suppliers. So there is in the report catalog, all message dialogue requesting response, or just the messages for me requesting responses. So something that we're going to carry through contract management, sourcing, and the portal is how we're communicating with our suppliers, how Infor has enabled this within different applications. So we're going to touch on that. Obviously, we have contract alerts, we have contract deliverables that aren't closed, active and expiring contracts, we have list views, we've got reports themselves, all available through the portal to help us kind of keep track of our contracts and our suppliers, being able to communicate with them. So contract management, if you think of that as the kind of hub and spoke to this, we are interacting through contract management with items, with events, with suppliers, with vendor agreements for purchase orders, with rebates, with retainage if we're using that, as well as accounts and distribution, and obviously, invoices as well when it comes to being able to pay that. So things are obviously coupled closely with the rest of the P2P process. Contract management, again, a lot of people use it as a standalone, a place for their contract repository, as a contract repository. They use it for cost defaulting, for being able to track spend and performance analysis. You obviously do not have to use strategic sourcing and the supplier portal with that, but they really do work very well together. And you could decide that you don't want to ever do strategic sourcing. You're never going to put things out for bid. You don't have a need to do any type of negotiation. You're always going to be using the vendor's paper type thing. You could decide just to use contract management and the supplier portal. And so there are some efficiencies and some reasons that we might want to do that. So from a strategic sourcing and contracting perspective, they're crucial for our business because they're ensuring the best value from the suppliers. We're managing our risk, and we're optimizing our operational efficiency. So if we look at our contract manager homepage, there's a place on here for supplier portal. So supplier dialogue. Supplier dialogue is going to be a place we're going to see in multiple different parts of the application. It gives us a way to easily communicate with our suppliers. We have a dialogue capability in several places, which we're going to kind of go through. And instead of having emails that are going out to a supplier related to a contract or just delivery in general issues or things like that, we now have a place in the system where we can store those. We're not just doing emails where we have to go find them or put them in a different file. We can do dialogue if we're using the supplier portal and be able to communicate with our suppliers, and the system is recording all of that so that we can easily manage that and keep track of it. So this is just an example under Contract Manager with messages and dialogue. This is actually, a supplier message dialogue requesting response. And so this works both ways. They can ask us questions, we can ask them questions. But like I said, everything is kept within the system and recorded. If we're in purchase orders and we've got a question, maybe we're looking for a proof of delivery or something like that, related to a purchase order, we can create a supplier dialogue and message our contact at the vendor. So this one happens to be Grainger. We can have a message here. We can set a priority level. Do we want to make a response required? And if we've got some sort of documentation we want to go with it, you can do that attachment there as well. You can also do this with invoices. So if we're using the supplier portal and we want to be able to communicate with our supplier around an invoice issue that we're having, again, it's in the system and both sides will be able to see this interaction that we've had. So keeping things very transparent with our suppliers. If this is what a supplier would see in the supplier portal, there's an actionable email, and there's also a list of any message dialogue needing a response when they log into that supplier portal. So you don't have to ask them to please log in every day to keep track of your messages or to see if there's a message. They will receive an email telling them that there is a message that they need to act on, and it's an actionable email. So they can click here and sign into the portal, and they'll be able to see or respond to that message. They can see the message in the email, but in order to do a response, they'll have to go into the portal. So sample document templates, it's one of my favorite places within the application. And it gives us all kinds of things, upload templates, fact sheets. We can do our own storage of important documents, maybe related to, training or a checklist or something like that, for all different kinds of groups within the Cloud Suite. But this happens to be that there is a fact sheet in there under sample document templates for supplier messaging and dialogue. So it explains how to set up that process for supplier message and dialogue, as I said, as a fact sheet. So that's always super helpful to have references like that. So if we look at strategic sourcing, sourcing is simply, we're creating an event and we are the output of those sourcing events can be either a purchase order, or it could be that we just want to create a contract and lines that are associated with that. So we're sharing some information between contract management or with contract management and strategic sourcing. So we're sharing suppliers, we're sharing categories, contacts, questions, and the terms and conditions or articles. So it's kind of, they're definitely integrated. It's not, if you're using contract management, like I said, you don't have to use strategic sourcing, but they do work well together, and you don't have to set some of these things up twice. We are using those in both places. Okay, so the integration, We can use it for setting up and maintaining bidding events. We can analyze complex events. We can request bids and quotes. We can award events. We can analyze the spending patterns and the supplier use. So with strategic sourcing, again, we're relating this back to our suppliers. When we create an event, we can allow our bidders, our either suppliers or potential suppliers, to ask questions. Those questions are available or visible, I might say, to everybody that is involved in that bidding process. So it's not, if you put a question out there, it's available. It's also that we can ask questions when a supplier is registering themselves. So we have a couple of different ways to do the portal we'll talk about in a few minutes, but there are questions that we can ask. We can also ask our suppliers to register their commodity codes. So if we put something out for a sourcing event, they're not going to get picked up in it if we don't have commodity codes connected to those particular suppliers. So if we register them or if they register themselves and they update it, we can have required questions. We can have, commodity codes required that they need to answer. But we can also do these Q&As associated with the events themselves. And if we allow suppliers to register themselves, they want to do business with your company, and we allow them to go out and register, we can then do validation so that every supplier that wants to do business with you, you don't have to allow it. You can go in and do your checks on them, and if they come back with an issue, you don't have to validate them as a supplier for you. So something, again, we're now looking more at risk management in supplier evaluations. Strategic sourcing helps identify and mitigate potential risks associated with suppliers, such as supply chain disruptions, financial instability, or ethical concerns. We can do these supplier evaluations either yearly. If you want to evaluate all of your suppliers yearly, you can absolutely do that. Or you could choose to do something that we want to evaluate our suppliers at the end of every contract. So you have some choices when it comes to evaluations for our suppliers. So it's just an example. This is a little old, but the idea is still valid. So the category, we can set up whatever categories we want. So this one happens to have invoice accuracy, delivery, vendor returns, credit memo handling, just general customer service. And then under each category, we have the criteria that we're actually rating. So under invoice accuracy, how often are the invoices accurate? What about credit memos? What about dispute resolution? How long does that take? How painful is it to get a new invoice if there's an error or something on it? So we can relate those to their performance, like I said, over the past year or the length of the contract. Depends on how you want to do it. We also want to keep track of spend analysis. By running and reviewing the spend analysis, we can monitor our commitment versus reality of what the expected spend was. So if we've got an expectation that a certain department or location is going to be spending a certain amount of money with a supplier, we can tell if we're on track with that or not. We can see what our spend is. This is just from a sandbox, so it's horrible. Our non-contract spend is 98%, and we only have 0.65 that's or 1% that's on contract. Hopefully everybody's doing much better than our sandbox is, but we keeping track of spend and being able to relate that back to our suppliers and make our commitments is obviously very important. So the supplier portal offers a lot of capabilities to empower our suppliers to be a little more self-sufficient. We can configure this however we want to allow them to see and do only the things that we want them to. So this is what they would have access to if we just, open it up. Sourcing, contracts, they can enter recalls, they can see recalls, they can see orders, they can actually enter invoices if we want them to. They can see payment details. If they're a small facility or a small supplier and they're not using EDI, we can ask them to do PO acknowledgments here in the supplier portal. They can see and help us with vendor returns. Like I said, we can do invoice creation. We can view and bid on events. And they can be, somewhat self-sufficient. So they can reset their passwords if they need to. They can tell us if there's a new person that's involved in the contracting area. They can tell us if they've moved, they've got a new address or something like that. So, or if they've picked up something new and they've got new commodity codes that they want to add. So we can empower them to do all kinds of different things on the portal for themselves. If you're not very familiar with the portal, haven't implemented it yet, let's kind of look at the options. We can give suppliers the URL and let them register themselves. So there's some good and bad related to that. If we've already done the contract management implementation, we can just give the suppliers the credentials, and when they sign in, the system will ask them for the first time to reset their password. So it's not something that if the portal wasn't implemented when you did your initial Cloud Suite or FSM implementation, it's always something that you can add in. It's just a matter of working through exactly how that is going to be implemented. So assuming that we were going to give somebody access to do their own registration, they would go through the registration, the bank information, enter diversity codes, answer any questions that we've got, commodity codes, any certifications, proxy notifications, and ultimately they'll get to the point where their registration status is complete. So we can do validation on this as well on our side, and so they'll get some information that your account's been set up. You'll now receive email notification of events, things like that. And they'll also get something on the profile itself in the portal, as well as an email. Okay, so we've gone through the contract management, strategic sourcing, supplier portal. Our suppliers are really integral to all of that. So strategic sourcing and contracting are crucial for our business because they ensure that the best value from suppliers, we're getting that best value from suppliers, managing our risk and optimizing operational efficiency. By carefully selecting and managing our suppliers, companies can reduce costs, improve product quality, and foster innovation, ultimately leading to a more competitive and resilient business. So the attitude, used to be several years ago, that it wasn't necessarily, a partnership. It was how painful can I make it on my supplier so they'll give me the best deal? And really now we're looking for performance-based rewards. What are financial incentives? What are recognition and awards, or business opportunities, or collaborative projects that we can work on with our suppliers? So GHX has done a study. This one happens to be related to healthcare, but really resonates across a lot of our businesses. But it was a collaboration between healthcare providers and suppliers, and they were looking at key themes: information sharing, pricing behavior, regulatory changes. 98% of hospital leaders said that the pandemic exposed significant supply chain vulnerabilities in their hospitals. That's not news to anybody. But the supply shortages obviously had that big impact on healthcare in general. And PPE is, an acronym that I'm sure people are tired of hearing at this point. So the pandemic really altered that supplier and hospital relationship. So leading to really heightened focus on reliable partnerships, risk mitigation, optimizing shortages, disruptions. There were disruptions on all kinds of things, not just PPE. So it really focused in on that increased resilience on strategic partnerships, a focus on supply chain. Supply chain wasn't necessarily in the forefront of hospitals or in companies in general. And the pandemic really put a focus on that. So we're looking at the modernization of procurement processes, prioritization of the supply chain, appreciation for our reliable suppliers, and what that long-term impact has been from the pandemic and things that could happen in the future. So really the impact and lessons for healthcare supply chains. And it came from an article, like I said, or a study that they did, lessons learned from the pandemic and strategies for the future. It was a news medical article. So since the pandemic, from healthcare specifically, we've evolved so that we're better protected from future unexpected events. So we are, instead of having a single supplier for things, we are dual sourcing our items that are very critical. So we're diversifying those suppliers. And we have now become more reliant on artificial intelligence to help predict what our demand and shortages and stockpiles and that kind of thing are going to be. So obviously, Infor has come out now with Velocity Suite, which focuses a lot on these types of things that people need to be up and running on their cloud suite for several months in order to take advantage of that and really get the best benefit out of it. But something that you should look at as far as the supplier relationships and supply chain in general. So we're really building those strong relationships between providers and suppliers. We're looking for ways to drive efficiency. The landscape these days is definitely looking for cost savings, but we need to be efficient. We need to mitigate supply disruptions, but at the same time, we need to make sure that where we're cutting is not causing us issues with our supplier relationships. So kind of the conclusion for this, or the takeaways, in essence: strategic sourcing and contracting, not just about finding the cheapest suppliers, but about building strong long-term relationships with suppliers who can contribute to the overall success and sustainability of the business. So obviously, we've got some effective contract management, takeaways, strategic sourcing, and then the supplier relationships building on the portal. So we had 30 minutes today. I thank you for your participation in this webinar. If you're interested in signing up for future webinars, the rest of the year, there's going to be a focus on HCM. We also have one of our talented reporting people is going to do a webinar. Those should be updated shortly with what the remaining webinars are going to be. And we're working to get our YouTube channel updated as well with additional information.